So next on stage, we have yet another very interesting session on truth, trust, and trolls. We're going to be exploring the interrelation between truth, trust, and technology in the 21st century. To lead this discussion, I want to invite the chair of that session, Tanit Koch, who is a journalist and a former editor of a newspaper.
Thank you so much. Hello there, it's a great honor to be here. As a journalist, as a woman, I've never been to Iceland, and I'm just thrilled to have a premiere in this wonderful country. We live in a world where people have more sources of information and actually use them than ever before. But despite this, or maybe even because of this, the notion of truth and of trust seem to have eroded. Misinformation travels faster and farther than ever before, and digital platforms and the internet are being weaponized not only during election times by bots and trolls and targeted political ads. Many of us, I think, in this room wonder whether what we see in our timelines is only there to confirm our existing views, and whether we will be stuck in echo chambers or filter bubbles, and whether those filter bubbles are actually created by digital or maybe by ourselves. I'm very, very honored and very glad to have three wonderful panelists with me today. Please welcome with me Amy Weaver, president of Salesforce, a massive cloud computing company based in San Francisco. A very warm welcome, Amy, please. Fellow executive from the media industry, Christy Tanner, general manager of CBS News Digital. For all non-US watchers, CBS is one of the largest commercial networks. I very much enjoy Mr. Corden, who runs the Carpool Karaoke. And I think what also deserves an applause is that CBS is actually live streaming this event right now while we speak. Thank you very much for that. And a big thanks to Oslo Sigurdsbjørndóttir, who only heard about being on this panel last night because she was in Parliament until midnight last night. She's a member of the Icelandic Parliament and chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee. Thank you all very much for being here. The session is titled Truth, Trust, and Trolls, but in terms of society, technology, what actually is the thing that worries you most, Amy?
I think for me, it's really trust, and who can we trust at this point? And when I look at what trust is, trust is really the ability, the belief in the reliability, the honesty, and the ability of someone. And every year, Edelman does a study about trust. And last year, it was really unprecedented. They looked at people's belief in the trust of 4 different areas. They looked at corporations, at governments, at media, and even at NGOs. And when the results came out last January, trust in these organizations had dropped by 20 to 30 percentage points. Not just 20 to 30%, but 20 to 30 percentage points. It was really an unprecedented drop in trust across every industry. And I have to say, this year, both politically and for technology, we haven't done a lot to earn back that trust. And it's become, I think, a crisis of trust. And I think particularly for the technology industry, I worry about regaining that more than anything else.
Thank you very much. When it comes to trust, media, of course, is always playing a very particular role. Christy, what are your thoughts?
Well, Amy and I talked about this a bit yesterday in the session that we did. When Edelman broke out the media portion of that study, they broke it out into journalism and platforms. And what they found is that actually, this is last year, trust in journalism was up 5% and trust in platforms was down 2%. That survey was done in 2017. So I'm really curious to see how that's changed this year. In terms of what concerns me the most, I do think that the threat to elections via misinformation is the thing that concerns me the most right now.
Oslo.
Yes, I think I would say that I'm afraid we don't find the line between verify right information from false and the line between the government not only controlling the media they like. So I mean, the line between we need to find between the false news and all this information we are getting, and we are trying to verify what is trolls and what is not, and what's actual media and right information and so on. And it's frightening me as well that the government can have the power and the legislators to control and support only the media they like.
Yes, which would of course be a massive problem for freedom of
Yes.
expression. Just to get a sort of temperature in the room here, who's worried about the future of democracy at the moment? Yeah, that's a big show of hands. This is also out of curiosity. Who has a Facebook account? You have Facebook accounts too?
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
Yes, yes. Who has recently deleted any social media account, not just Facebook, anything, okay? Some. And who of those who have a Facebook account actually trust Facebook? Here's one. I think we have a member of Facebook here in the audience. No, this is just an interesting show of hands because it shows that people can very much distinguish between convenience. I very much trust Facebook to like inform me about my family and friends. I wouldn't necessarily trust Facebook, who are not editors, to sort of have my timeline filled with the latest stuff that maybe is challenging my views. So, Chrissy, the news industry at the moment is very much challenged from the business side. If you, like 30 years ago, or even today, walk into a train station and you see a newsstand, you can actually tell which logo is which and which newspaper is which. And online with a desktop with the sites, you can also see, okay, this is CBS, this is CNN, etc. On Facebook, on Twitter, Google News, it all sort of looks the same. So it's very difficult nowadays to actually build trusted brands online. Is there anything you think tech companies could or should do to not finance journalism, but not to obstruct journalism financing itself?
Well, I think the responsibility really lies in the media companies to embrace technology and use it for their own business purposes. And going back 30 years, I was in the newspaper business. I was started out as a journalist, as a print reporter. And when digital was taking off, I went back to business school because I saw that it was going to change our industry. And not to say that I'm smarter than anybody else, but so many newspapers in particular did not invest in technology and instead became reliant on technology-centric companies for their business models. And I think that's why they're in trouble right now, which is not true for CBS. CBS News invested in technology more than 10 years ago, and that is why we now have the streaming service that is enabling us to stream this live from Iceland around the world. I wish that other media companies had made the same investment that CBS did. I think that showed foresight, and I was not responsible for that decision at CBS. But I think that there's an aversion to technology that still exists in the media industry and in government, and that is part of the reason why we are where we are right now.
All right. Amy, you are in technology. One of your sort of fellow technologicians, Jeff Bezos, recently said that he expects society to develop a sort of immune system against bad use of technology. Mm-hmm. Do you think we should wait for society to develop it, or like in a Darwin-like survival of the fittest way, or whether we should maybe develop a vaccine and help society to come to pace a little faster?
Well, first, I hope he's right and that this is developed and we do come up with a way of coping with this, but we can't wait. I think we have to be investing in new opportunities now to increase the trust in the technology. And I think it comes in a number of areas. One is we have to partner effectively. The technology companies need to be partnering with media. We need to be partnering with government. We need to make sure that there's ways that we can come together and find common ground. The other thing is that I think technology companies and corporations in general need to really be asking what their values are. And at Salesforce, we're very clear that trust is our number one value. And sometimes that can slow things down. And Facebook very famously had the expression for years, move fast and break things. And I don't mean to call out Facebook because really that could be just about any company, any fast-moving entrepreneurial company. It's like, let's just go fast. Things are going to break, but
And
we'll
disrupt.
get it all. We'll get it right.
Disrupt, yeah.
I think the shift to trust means that things are going to slow down. And we're going to have to understand that to truly earn someone's trust, it takes some friction. It should take some time. And we need to look internally and make sure that trust is the number one value and earn that from everyone who's using our technology.
The topic of regulation immediately comes up when
Yes.
we talk about tech and trust and all these problems. Do you think the platforms should be allowed to self-regulate, or should they be regulated?
Well, I think it was always almost a matter of faith that you said that companies will self-regulate, we'll be fine. We're moving so fast, governments can't possibly keep up with us. I think those days are over. I don't think that has worked well. And I do think that there is some level of regulation that is necessary. For example, at Salesforce, we recently called for a federal privacy law. We think it's time to have common sense privacy protections in the United States. But that comes with partnership, and it comes with partnering with the government and with the media to get that right and work together.
You're looking at the politician on
I'm
the panel.
looking.
Oslo. Do you think you should regulate? Is there something you're doing already here in Iceland?
Yeah, I mean, clear and quite simple regulation will always, I think, be good for both the media and the people. But we need also to be really careful to don't have it too strict or not
Yes.
somehow,
Exactly.
because free media is also really important for everyone on
Yes.
the same area. So, I mean, this line is also very narrow, I think, where to step.
And it's always easy to call for regulation, but much, much more complicated to say
Yeah.
which regulation it should be.
Exactly.
I mean, do you have a feeling that the regulators are actually tech-savvy enough? The legislators in particular. Some of us may have seen the hearing on Capitol Hill of Mark Zuckerberg. Do they know enough about the stuff they think about regulating?
Well, the Facebook or Zuckerberg hearings that took place last April, May did not give anyone great confidence in the technology skills of the U.S. Congress. It was not a high point. But I think that it's also a responsibility of the technology companies to help educate governments. We can't say no regulation, have it get to a point where regulation is needed, and then expect a group of people who we've not worked with to suddenly come up with the legislation. I think it's really our responsibility also to work very closely with governments, make sure that they understand what our concerns are, how the technology works, and more importantly, where we see it going in the future, because it's changing rapidly.
Yeah, I maybe think we also need to look at that point that in this new world of all this information, I mean, it has changed so fast that our education system needs to change with it. And we need to educate our children that where they're getting the information from, to look where they're reading it. I mean, what is behind the information you're reading, where it's coming from. And it's your own judge and knowledge to decide what you think of this information. And I think our education system is a big part of what needs to also step in the future with everything else, like we see.
Chrissy, do you think there's a problem that we always talk about sort of what's happened in the past, and we're not having enough forecasting skills and I don't know, ambition or originality to come up with the next big thing? Let it be deep fake in a negative, or maybe even...
I do think that what we have seen in the area of fake news is just the beginning. And what we really need to be focused on right now are the technologies that are newer and developing that will be huge 5 years from now. So Internet of Things, connected homes, connected cars, voice recognition, face recognition, all of those things are already being used to create a level of misinformation that would make the 2016 presidential election seem like child's play. And so I do think it's our responsibility as citizens and as a society to to demand that that we take the steps to manage this in the future.
Amy, do you see the threat that there is a new segregation in the world which will separate people into the ones who are tech savvy and make use of it either in a good or in a bad way, and those who are mostly scared of what technology can do because they don't grasp the whole sense of it?
I'm not sure I see the segregation happening that way. I think when we looked around the room and you asked who was on Facebook, who was using this, it's really ubiquitous.
But is the usage of Facebook already, does that already mean being tech savvy, like understanding how the data works, how you can make use of them?
That's a good distinction, because I think a few years ago, not so long ago, we would have said, to be on Facebook, you have to be tech savvy, you have to understand. And now, everyone's grandparents are on Facebook. This is not probably the distinction it was in the past.
Or Twitter or Instagram.
Or Twitter or Instagram, yes, or all of the above. So I think you're right that that's not necessarily a distinction in terms of whether you're tech savvy or not. I think the difference right now is people need to understand how their data is being used. And when you go onto Facebook and you're giving personal information about yourself, or Twitter or other accounts, what is happening to that data? How is that being used? And do you have a choice on it? And I think that accountability and that understanding is something that's really come to light in the last year. And we're really changing the level of understanding and changing the level of control that people have over their data.
And again, to bring this on a media level, are journalists maybe spending a little too much time on Twitter and should sometimes leave the newsroom to go out and talk to real people?
I can only speak for myself. I don't think I'm spending too much time on Twitter. I think coming to Iceland and meeting all the smart people in this room is something that I think is really important. As a news organization, we have really invested in local expertise in politics, and which is something that we have. It's an investment that we made to get our service out of the filter bubble of DC and New York. Which, if you're from the U.S., a lot of the journalists are based in either Washington, D.C. or New York City, and there is a disconnect between some of those people and Kansas City and New Orleans and Wisconsin. So we have tapped into local media outlets to provide us with expertise when we've been covering the midterms and the local races. So I do think that the professionals and the media and government need to step outside of their filter bubbles wherever they may be, and I'm sure they exist in Iceland too. But I think that's important, and so maybe I wouldn't single out any particular platform, but I think putting the screen down for a little while and interacting with people is I'm in favor of it. So.
As a politician, do you think when media covers, and you're a politician, but you're also a citizen, is your impression that media are close enough to the people, that we're doing too much navel gazing? Is there a Reykjavik bubble compared to the rest of Iceland?
We in Iceland, we don't use Twitter so much. I mean, mostly young people do. And I'm still teaching some of my MPs to be on Twitter. They are not all there. I think, of course, the media needs to kind of try to show, for my example, when I went or started to be an MP, I didn't feel that the media always was telling how I felt the week was in Parliament. They just took some highlights and the most aggressive things said in the podium and so on. So sometimes I felt like we are doing a lot of great things all together, all parties, but the media is not very interested in that. Maybe because they think the people are not interested in that. But when I meet young people and they ask me about the work in Parliament, they are all very surprised. Because they
you actually do work, or?
Yes, I actually work, and what I do, my job is not only having speeches in the Parliament on the boring news station you can watch on television, and they sometimes think that because that's the only way the media shows us.
Mm-hmm. I think there's something to that though, which is that that media, in some cases, the news organizations do serve as a filter, and they curate the news and create a hierarchy. which, if done well, is useful for people. But what we're seeing in our streaming service is an increasing interest in live streamed events. So whether it's a campaign speech or the Kavanaugh hearings that we just had, the day of the Brett Kavanaugh confirmation hearings was one of the biggest days ever in the history of our 4-year-old streaming news service. And that was people tuning in for 9 hours of congressional hearings. 10 years ago would have been completely unheard of to have those massive numbers of people tuning in to see for their own eyes what's happening in the room. And that's the unfiltered version. So I do think that all the issues that we had in the 2016 election in the US and then other things globally have created greater interest in unfiltered news and live events, and I actually think that's a good thing and a good use of technology.
Well, I think it's interesting going back to what you were saying about education and how do we train people to think critically. And I remember when I first went off to college or university, one of the biggest shocks to me, and this makes me sound very, very naive, but at 18 was being really taught not to believe everything that was printed. You know, if I read a book, if I read a newspaper, I really took that as the gospel. That was that. And really learning how to critically assess who wrote it, what was their angle, what were they trying to do, was something I learned at that age. I have 3 sons who are teenagers. They're having to learn that now. And I'm having to constantly ask them, you know, where they got their information, what their source was, asking them to do that. And it's at a much earlier in their lives than
Let me just jump in there because I find that all massively interesting. I'm sometimes wondering whether we're maybe attributing too much rationale to people because it sometimes say it's all about facts and we just have to deliver the facts and the things live and unfiltered. And what we can see on the platforms, but also in general, is that facts aren't sort of winning the narrative. It's emotions. And how do we, without sort of letting go of ethics, of what is good and worthy, how do we manage to win the narrative over those who sort of actively pour into those emotions? Is that possible?
Well, I'm an optimist, and I believe in facts, and facts coming out eventually. And so I think
But what if facts aren't interesting enough? What if people want the emotion? They want a sense of belonging. They want to be confirmed what they think. And
I mean, I think that there's a difference in what people share, and that there's science showing that what people share on social platforms is tied to an emotion, and where they're gathering facts. And I think those are actually 2 different information experiences. And sharing a heartwarming story is different than trying to make a decision about who to vote for. I am an optimist because we started a news service 4 years ago, and its average age is 38, which compared to broadcast news is 58 and 68. So this tells me that young people are very interested in news, facts, trusted brands, journalism, which we make a huge investment in every day, despite the business model challenges. So I'm really encouraged by what we have seen in the growth of this service in terms of the next generation being able to parse the difference between facts and fake news.
although it's not just the next generation, it's our generation, it's every generation here basically in the room. And what discourages me is that, give an example, Facebook, I think earlier this year tried to get rid of disinformation by placing, or maybe it was last year, placing a disputed tag on false articles, false news. And they then realized that with that tag, disputed, which would pop up on your timeline, those articles would actually get shared more. So it was a backfire effect. It was the exact opposite of what they wanted. And so they got rid of the disputed tag because quite obviously there is some sort of naughtiness in human nature, and we, or some of us apparently, like to just to do what is wrong and to weaponize that.
Yeah, I think it's easy to, I mean, like you asked before, have someone stopped on social media, left some of all these things. But it's also very important that we we see how the discussion is, even though it's false. I mean, so we can get the right information out, and we can stop, at least not politicians. We can't stop to try to fight hate with love. We need to show why we are fighting for human rights, for example. I mean, and show it on the media and be there, even though the false things or the hate speeches are very loud sometimes, and you just want to leave all of this and live your normal life without all these social media things. And we need to be there, because if we don't be there, if we are not there, and if we are not fighting all this discussion that we think is wrong, we will never win it.
I think that's would be a very, very good closing remark. I would just love to give the other two panelists a chance to also have one last word on what, if you were like the emperor of the US, if you were in the White House, what would be the thing you would do right now to change the current situation?
If I was in the White House, I would make federal government data transparent to the taxpayers. And I think that's that would be a great use of technology.
I love the idea of being emperor of the United States, so thank you. I will take that. My top one actually would be more global. It would be a set of global privacy principles so that your privacy, your data, your control doesn't depend on where you live in the world, and that everyone would have similar principles and similar protections.
Thank you very much. My personal wish would be that for all of us, before we share something, we first check the source, because the fake news isn't just the others, as we sometimes think. It may also be us. So it's not just trolls. It's sort of in all of us, and confirmation bias gets us all. Thank you very much for a very, very interesting, inspiring, and insightful panel. Asloth Sigurðsbjörnsdóttir. Thank you. We thought German had long names, but it doesn't. Amy Weaver and Christy Tanner, thank you very much for being here. Cheers.
Thank you.